Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Castro, Senior Director of Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us today as we continue our conversation regarding our newest initiative, talent finance. As we all know, our economy is constantly transforming, and our economy is constantly transforming, and the way we develop and invest in talent also has to transform. We hope this initiative changes how we think about investing in and preparing our workforce for the future. This is imperative if we want to continue to grow our economy, maintain global competitiveness, and close the opportunity gap. Last week, we released our new white paper, which considers a new public-private approach to talent and outlines a set of guiding principles and recommendations that focus our efforts in ways that are different from previous private and public investment approaches. And we also launched our event series, kicking off this important conversation about how to strike the right balance between the roles of employers, workers, and the government. And we explored how these diverse stakeholder groups can build partnerships and promote pilots and demonstrations of emerging talent finance innovations. Today's focus is on how the public and private sectors can leverage new and emerging talent finance innovations, and moreover, how they can better align their investments to achieve better outcomes and greater impacts. Before we move forward with today's agenda, I want to take a moment to thank our partners who have been working with us on this project. Our partners at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, the Greater Houston Partnership, and Working Nation have worked alongside with us to develop and advance this work. And thank you to our funders, JP Morgan, Microsoft Philanthropies, Google.org, Cognizant Foundation, and Schmidt Futures. Thank you for your generous financial contributions. Without this work would not have been possible. Throughout today's program, we invite you to offer your comments and thoughts in the chat feature. As we continue to develop this program, we really value your input. And so now, let's get started with today's program as we hear from Gayatri Agnew from Walmart. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stuart Andresen at the Atlanta Fed, and today we're here with Gayatri Agnew, who is the Director of Economic Opportunity for Walmart.org. Gayatri, thanks for joining us today and coming to talk a little bit about the Talent Finance Initiative and the report that's just been released.
Hi, Stuart. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me today.
So Gayatri, the paper makes the case that the economy has changed and that the new economy really makes us, puts us in a position where we need to be thinking about how we fund and finance workforce development, education, training, and career preparation in the future. Can you give us just a little bit of a perspective from you and from Walmart about how you see the economy changing and what that means for funding and financing training today?
Gosh, that's a great question. Honestly, everyone at Walmart, especially in Walmart.org, is thrilled with the U.S. Chamber's initiative on talent financing. It's incredibly important that we start to recognize that the way that people move through work in the 21st century economy today is so different than the way they used to move through work, and the role of learning and upskilling has become so critical to one's ability to support themselves and their family and continue to grow a lifelong career. You used to go to college or go to a trade school, you'd learn a skill and you'd apply that skill over the course of your lifetime in a single job. And that's just not our reality today. That's no one's reality today. The reality is that people are changing jobs much more consistently and constantly. Even if they're staying with the same company, they're needing to adapt and improve and upskill and learn. And all of that learning requires talent financing capacity. So I think new innovations, public-private partnerships, different ways of thinking about how you enable and facilitate lifelong learning versus just single instance learning is an incredibly important part of how we position for the future.
So can you actually talk a little bit about some of Walmart's efforts to provide education and training to workers, particularly around like the Live Better You program? What were some of the things that brought the company there? What are some of the ways that you guys start to conceptualize and think about value when you think about the programs that you're providing for workers?
I think first and foremost, Walmart believes, and it is the reality of our business that our people make the difference. And so the investments we make as a company in our human capital are what allows our company to continue to grow and to perform the way that we are. And we believe that, and that's why we invest in the education and training of our people the way that we do. So to understand how we support the educational completion of our associates, formal educational completion, I first want to make sure I've shared about Walmart Academies. So several years ago, Walmart started to scale a program called Walmart Academies. Walmart Academies are co-located schools with our stores. And so in 200 locations across the United States, we actually co-locate learning facilities physically alongside our stores. 70% of the time that students, Walmart associates, spend in the academy, they actually spend in practical application of skills. And then the other percent, they're in a digital learning environment, fully digital enabled learning environment, where they're actually in a classroom with their peers from across a region or a market, and they're learning. And so Walmart offers to all of our associates our Live Better You program, which provides hundreds of different learning opportunities for $1 a day to the associate. Walmart picks up the tuition, fees, and cost of books. We have programs that range from short-term certificates offered through our learning partner, Purdue Global, to formal college degrees at places like University of Florida or Bellevue University. And then just this past summer, we actually brought online short-term certificates offered through Penn Foster that allow for a learner to upskill as a plumber or an HVAC professional. And I should say all of these learning experiences are accessed by our students through the Guild platform, which allows for a learning coach to be supportive of every student persisting through these educational opportunities. So what we've done is we've structured a learning experience that leverages the training that the associate is already getting within the company through the academies. We've given them credit for that training. We've underwritten the financial burden of cost of that training. And then we've also ensured that learners were supported in completion through that training. So it's an incredibly innovative model. And I think it's a model that, every employer is going to have to build a model that works for them based on their workforce needs, and based on their future talent needs. But the idea that employers should be investing more in our people and in their education, training, and upskilling is a value that Walmart holds very dear and takes very seriously.
Gayatri, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing some of your thoughts and telling us a little bit about all the great things that are happening at Walmart and the way that you all are thinking about the future of funding and financing talent development. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Stuart. It's been a pleasure to talk with you today.
Good afternoon and good morning from wherever you may be. I'm Peter Beard. I work at the Greater Houston Partnership, and it has been a pleasure being a partner with the U.S. Chamber Foundation and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta in writing this paper. What I thought I would do today is set some context and then engage in a conversation with Jason Tishko from the U.S. Chamber Foundation around what innovation is. The focus of today's session is really to talk about the innovations that we're looking for here in the Talent Finance Initiative. And one thing to kind of think about is, last week we released the paper and really wanted to start these forums to get people thinking about what are the opportunities to work differently, to finance talent differently. And then if you remember, the paper has a number of different things in it. It has the opportunity to think about what are the guiding principles which are going to be critical as we think about innovations, because we want to avoid the unintended consequences, but we also want to be deliberate about the intended consequences of things we're trying to do. Next slide, please. And then we also in that had recommendations. And so when we think about the recommendations, there were a number of different ones that looked at a lot of different things, from kind of the importance of partnerships, which we talked about last week, to the innovations that are going to be necessary for this to happen, as well as kind of what are the things we need to be thinking about from an enabling infrastructure. Next slide. If you remember, we had the framework in the paper, and today what we're going to focus on are the employer lanes, which are, how can employers lead differently and be part of this? And that'll be kind of the focus as we talk about some innovations. And if we go to the next slide, please. So those are the lanes that we're focusing in on. And the recommendations that we'll be highlighting today in various ways are kind of the recommendations that are set up there. If you go to the next slide, there are a number of different recommendations that are showing up here as well. And then finally, the last set of recommendations really looking at kind of what employer leadership is. And then I'm honored to have Jason Tishko join me here as we talk about, going to the next slide, some of the innovations that are listed in the paper and what makes them interesting from kind of an employer leadership perspective. Because if you remember clearly, this idea that it needs to be a public-private partnership is critical. Welcome, Jason. How are you doing today?
Hello, Peter. Thanks for joining today's session and leading this presentation. Look forward to talking with you about some of these new finance innovations and how employers are leading the way.
No, thanks for joining me. In the paper we have IBM, and in terms of its new collar jobs initiative, but I also know that AT&T has done something very similar in terms of how they've been trying to work and build internal kind of skills capacity of their internal workforce. Do you want to comment on what you know about IBM? And I'll be happy to talk about AT&T.
Yeah, I think what's most interesting about the examples that you've highlighted is there's a number of instances now where employers are becoming the educators themselves. And they are doing this not only to ensure that their workers have access to continuing education and training and credentialing opportunities as a benefit, but also to make sure that they are building a pipeline of workers that can be upskilled into destination jobs, or reaching out and providing education opportunities to others outside the company who then carry those credentials and experiences. And the companies know we can go out and actually find these individuals and bring them onto projects because they have the exact set of skills that we're looking for. So I think you're going to see more and more instances of this, kind of like what IBM's doing, where instead of just saying, hey, education is a benefit that you need to go manage, they're saying we're going to bring the education infrastructure inside our house, and we're going to build our own career pathways, our own education experiences and credentialing experiences. And then we're going to use that to kind of leverage talent in new and innovative ways to compete in today's talent marketplace.
And and that's a really good example. And when you look at what AT&T did with its Future Ready program, it realized that the technology had so much shifted within the organization that they had to reskill a significant portion of their workforce, up to 50%. And they, in essence, did a return on investment calculation of what it would take to displace a large set of workers and rehire. And they made the decision to make $1 billion investment in their workforce in order to be able to kind of have the talent that they need, but recognize that was probably the better choice than kind of going out into the marketplace and looking for their new talent. And so I thought that, whole idea that there was an ROI as to why they wanted to keep their existing employees in roles and, support their upskilling as well as finding those career pathways. So that's, I think, one of the innovations that I think is critically important. And then the other thing, we heard Gayatri just talking about, Walmart U as well as, or Walmart Academy as well as, My Life U. And those become, I think, interesting along with Amazon Career Choice, which are both brought into kind of the paper in terms of the innovations that employers are using to, one, provide additional education and skills for their workforce. Do you want to comment on anything that in terms of what you've known or seen?
Yeah, I think both in the Amazon context and companies like them, they're not only, again, bringing education inside, but you have a number of companies that are now kind of revisiting how they're managing a wide variety of employee benefits. And For a long time, companies, have provided tuition reimbursement, and for a lot of reasons that goes underutilized. But there's still tens of billions of dollars out there that companies are spending every year. And I think what's really interesting now is you have a group of companies who are going out and actually negotiating really good partnerships and deals on behalf of their workers, whether it's with a higher education partner or someone like, back to the AT&T example, someone like Udacity, who's providing like nano degree opportunities. But this idea that companies have purchasing power and can go out and leverage that purchasing power to stand up really strong education pathways outside the company too. And then instead of somebody having to go find those pathways on their own, front the money and get reimbursed later, you have companies saying, we'll pay up front, we'll cover those costs, and we will help you manage your education career pathway, much like we help you manage your healthcare benefits. And I think you're seeing just much stronger uptake of those opportunities, but much more intentionality about the career pathways that the companies are investing in, whether they are trying to grow their workforce from within, or if they're trying to make sure that these individuals are getting really competitive skills that's going to really enable their success once they leave the company.
No, and I think that's right. When you look at kind of Amazon's career choice program, they're certainly preparing individuals for pathways that exist in a lot of communities across. And I think there's a general recognition, work in one of the centers, you have that employee, and if they are extending that tenure of that employee by at least 6 months or another year beyond what they would normally do it, they're getting once again a huge ROI in terms of not having to do additional recruitment and additional training. But then if you look at some of the opportunities, they actually are in adjacent industries that Amazon would care about, like truck drivers and healthcare and IT, all things that are adjacent to many of the issues that Amazon cares about. One of the other innovations that I think we saw as we were working on the paper was this whole idea of how the staffing agencies are going to play a very different role in this space, in terms of there'll be full-time workers, there'll be staffing agencies that provide augmentation, but we highlighted one called Reverture. And I know that's a very interesting one where they actually provide a little bit of skills development for that last mile of skills training. And I know you have some sense of what's going on there.
Yeah, and I suspect with our panel, we're going to be hearing a lot more about Reverture and companies like them. But staffing agencies have always played a large role in the labor market, and I think now you're seeing a real opportunity for them to play an even bigger role because now instead of just saying, "Hey, we're here to actually place people in positions," they're actually providing, like you said, Peter, last mile training. So they are now becoming part of the education infrastructure and could take somebody who has received some foundational skills, some prior education, but can now provide some value added skills and credentialing, and then be the employer of record and actually place these people with an employer that mitigates their risk of taking on a full-time employee right away. But you have this kind of try before you buy opportunity here, and then individuals get a solid work experience while still building their skill set, and they have a real great opportunity to really apply for the job by working in it and demonstrating what they can do. And I think you're going to see just more of these staffing agencies becoming robust education pathways for individuals. And I think as companies start working together and collaborating more, there's a real opportunity for them to leverage these staffing agencies in new and innovative ways as part of their overall talent sourcing strategy. And I think what's even more interesting is these individuals are coming through and receiving these additional education benefits from these staffing agencies. It's a great opportunity to leverage new financial innovations like income share agreements as a way of offsetting that cost. But then the staffing agency or the employer backing it could take an equity stake in the long-term success of that worker.
No, and I think that makes sense. And we heard a lot about the income share agreement from Sheila Bair, and I think we'll hear a little more about it in the panel that follows this. The one final thing that we really spent time on in the paper was also how do we support the downside risks that employees face potentially from a displacement, for example, in COVID or some other things. And one of the innovations that I highlighted was kind of something that was coming out of Vermont, run by United Way, called Working Bridges. In essence, it's an income advance loan so that people aren't going to payday lenders. And I know one of the things we've talked about is how do you build kind of savings accounts or savings behaviors in this? And I think this is a wonderful example of how your the security that's put up is, in essence, you're an employee of a participating company for, I think, 3, maybe 6 months, and then you have access to being able to borrow $500 to $1,500, and it's payroll deducted. And then once you've paid off, it goes into a savings account, which I think builds this resiliency that's critically important. In many cases, we're seeing, a lot of the opportunity populations we're trying to support need to have additional, support services like financial coaching, like, getting ready to show up at work to do that. And I think that's a critical thing that we've got to be thinking about, is how do we partner with financial institutions or credit unions to actually help do this. Do you have anything you want to add to that in terms of what's going on there?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. I think the main takeaway within this example is financial wellness programs, and they're going to become a bigger part of what an employer offers. And much like the other examples were really good examples in the employer lanes of upside opportunity investments in education, training, and credentialing, we never want to miss the other side of the framework, which is downside risk mitigation and management. And employers can play a much more expanded role there through a whole new generation of financial wellness programs that can support financial literacy of workers, but also come up with a set of new savings account tools to really help people build a core set of savings that increases their financial stability, that would prevent them from having to go out and pursue a costly loan option. But also employers can play an expanded role in making sure workers are fully aware of and accessing all the various entitlements that they may be eligible for. Employer HR data is a powerful thing, and data about employment and earnings can go a long way to giving direction to individuals about what kind of benefits they're eligible for, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. So we never want to miss those pieces. While we do want to always be upskilling individuals and investing in continuing training, we know that the vicissitudes of the new economy, people need to plan for a rainy day, and making sure that employers are experimenting with new financial wellness programs is going to be a critical piece of ensuring the financial stability and resiliency of our workforce going forward.
And to your point, that Working Bridges program in Vermont also works with the employers to do on-site tax preparation to ensure folks are claiming their earned income tax credit, which is another huge piece to this. Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Peter.
And looking forward to continuing our work together. And then as we get ready to go to the next kind of session, I want to remind folks that part of the reason why Jason and I shared this opportunity was really to get your juices thinking about what are the innovations we need to be sharing. And so as we go into the conversation, please feel free to use the Q&A function to put ideas of what you're doing and what you've been seeing out there so that we can begin to think about how we're going to kind of take this work forward. And so finally, it's my pleasure to kind of introduce an interview that features Jay Puckett, who's a leader at the Boston Consulting Group, in a conversation with Sarah Miller from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to continuing this partnership.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Miller. I'm a senior advisor with the Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity at the Atlanta Fed, and I'm joined today by Jay Puckett with Boston Consulting Group. Jay, welcome.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start a little bit by referencing some of the work that, some of the recent work of Boston Consulting Group on fixing the global skills mismatch. Focusing on the notion, and to quote the report, to unlock the full potential of human capital in the face of constant change, we need to shift from mass standardization to mass uniqueness. This sentiment directly aligns with the U.S. Chamber Foundation's efforts in this talent finance initiative to create a new public-private approach for financing talent development. So the skills mismatch certainly manifests itself in a number of different ways. Employers struggle to find the skills and the talent that they need. There's inefficient communication between labor needs and the supply side for education and training. And then therefore, we're left with an education and training system that in many cases prepares people with skills and competencies that are outdated by the time that they graduate. So the report to this point references a hidden productivity tax and a qualifications trap. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the implications of that tax and that trap, and what we should think about in terms of mitigating the risks, financial and otherwise, that those pose for employers and for workers and learners.
So one of the things that we found when we did this research was that the skills mismatch really represents people that are both underemployed and people that are overemployed. And if you look at it on a global basis, it represents about a 6% tax to global GDP. And so this represents people that are in jobs where they don't fully have the skills that are needed to do those jobs. And so that comes at a productivity tax or penalty because they don't have all the skills needed to do the job. You also have people that are overqualified for a job, and when that happens, you can also end up with situations where people just don't have the motivation that they need. If they're overqualified, that can cause a drain as well.
So BCG has certainly been active in various education and workforce efforts across the country. The Commit Partnership, Upskill Houston, Good Reason Houston. So obviously BCG has a very deep commitment to working with communities to address the skills mismatch. And that's exactly what the Talent Finance Initiative and the white paper kind of upholds, is a number of different ways to think about new innovations and how we can catalyze new ways of working together through this public and private lens. But if you can help to think a little bit about how you see the talent finance initiative and movement really accelerating these solutions and aiming to address the skills match at a much more scalable level.
One, I think the Talent Finance Initiative just brings attention and data to bear on the problem, that we can realize, that we have productivity loss as a society, and that we can address that. I think a second thing that it's done is it's highlighted some examples of innovation to help spark and catalyze new thinking around things that we can do to make the talent finance more efficient and more effective. And so by leveraging these innovations, it'll hopefully trigger further investments and scaling of ideas in new places that really haven't been tried out yet. And so I think that's an important part. And then thirdly, hopefully it will trigger action on all parties, that employers will figure out how to do their part, educational institutions will figure out how to do their part, associations can work across employers, individuals can figure out how to weigh in and take personal responsibility, and government at large can make changes. And then lastly, I think just advocating for policy change, it gives us a nice foundation for rethinking how we fund things and how we think about return on investment. And so all of those things are important aspects of what this Talent Finance Initiative is bringing to bear.
Absolutely. No shortage of work ahead and roles for all of us to play, but I really appreciate all the work you've done, your partnership in this work, and we certainly look forward to the work ahead with you and other leaders in the field. Thank you so much for your time, Jay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope that the conversation thus far this afternoon has given you a lot to think about, and we're very excited for this panel to give you even more juice for that innovative thinking and the ideas that we hope that this will bring to the forefront, or that will encourage you to share. So let me introduce our esteemed panel here today. Joining us is Tracy Palangian. Tracy is the co-founder and CEO of Social Finance. Social Finance is an impact investing nonprofit that really focuses on mobilizing capital for social progress. That organization has been at the helm of development of pay for success programs and financing tools such as social impact bonds and career impact bonds. So we're so happy to have you with us here today, Tracy.
Thanks, Sarah.
Also joining us is Ryan Craig. Ryan is the co-founder and managing director of University Ventures. In addition to all of his work that he's been doing, which we'll get into, Ryan's thought and commentary and insights on where higher education is going regularly appears in marquee publications, including Forbes, TechCrunch, and Inside Higher Education. And we're so happy to have him with us here today and highlighted in the Talent Finance Initiative. So another marquee publication to add to that list. Thanks
Absolutely.
for joining us,
Sarah.
Ryan.
Thank you.
And then also with us here is Lisa Young. Lisa is the Associate Vice President of Enterprise Development at ASU. She works with the leadership team to advance corporate private sector partnerships through executive level engagement, and has been working to advance ASU's strategic partnerships, including that with Starbucks and with their regional partner InStride. Thanks for joining us, Lisa.
Thank you, Sarah. Good to be with everyone.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to the conversation. So we've already had a lot of discussion here this morning around why it's important to talk about these innovations in a new way. So we recognize that some of these financing approaches are not necessarily new, but the way that we want to think about them and the way that you all have been thinking about them is decidedly new. So as the paper and as this initiative has kind of laid out, is a set of guiding principles through which we want to rethink some of the innovations that are already in place and use that as guiding principles, as they say, for new work on the forefront. Chief of that is really to address the opportunity and the wealth gap. So some of those guiding principles around expanding choice, being fair and affordable, inclusive and equitable, we really do see those as core tenets of these financing tools moving forward, so that we truly can develop talent in a way that meets the competitive nature of our global economy, and that embraces more people into these opportunities that maybe have been left out in the past. So Ryan, I want to start with you and some of the work that you've been leading with University Ventures and a lot of the investments that you've been making. How do you see these financial innovations as a key strategy to closing the opportunity and wealth gap? And in what ways really are these approaches opening doors for disadvantaged people and disadvantaged workers in ways that really weren't possible before?
That's a great question. Thanks, Sarah. Well, look, I think what's most important is to understand the gaps are wider than they've ever been, particularly now with COVID. There are tens of millions of newly unemployed and underemployed workers who need a path to joining the vibrant, dynamic, digital, in most cases, economy. And they look around and they don't see them. So we need these new pathways to finance those pathways. And when we think about how to bridge that gap, to me, there are two fundamental frictions that are at the cause of it. Why doesn't everyone just go out and get the skills that employers are looking for? Two primary reasons. One is the cost to upskill, and the second is the uncertainty of the employment outcome. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate both of those things, you'd have tens of millions of people going out and getting combinations of digital skills, business skills, soft skills, and so forth that employers are seeking. But on the other side, you also have what we call hiring friction, which is the reduced propensity of employers to hire candidates for roles where literally they haven't checked every box already. Employers are more gun shy. COVID, where it's about remote hiring and remote onboarding for the most part. So it's really hard, but the increased cost of bad hires, increased churn at the entry level, we're up to 50% of new college grads going into good jobs are gone out of those jobs within 2 years. So you really need someone who's productive on day one. And so, the framework that I like to think about is, what new models, new pathways and new funding models will reduce both those frictions, both the education friction on the candidate side and the hiring friction on the employer side. And anything that does anything, obviously income share agreements, significantly reduce the education friction for candidates. Apprenticeships do both, right? Instead of paying, you're being paid, and they may provide the employer an opportunity to try before they buy, as Jason was just talking about. So we like those, and I hope we'll be able to talk about those in some more detail.
Absolutely. And I really love the way that you frame the dual friction that we're dealing with here. Friction on the learner and worker side and friction on the employer side. So Lisa, I need to turn to you in the ASU and the InStride model. So I'm curious, kind of just same Same question to you. You know, how are you seeing this as kind of a key way that we're addressing the wealth gap and the opportunity gap? And I think your program speaks directly to those objectives.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll build upon what Ryan laid out in terms of the framework, but you know, so much of what we're talking about is really leveling the playing field, really driving and infusing a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce, but that has to happen way up front. So you start on the educational side, where when you level the playing field and more people and a broader scope of individuals are given the opportunity, this then has those forward-looking long-term effects. And this is, I think, what we're discussing now. It's what are those mechanisms, whether it's, you know, the different funding mechanism, fusing the public-private sectors more closely to find ways that really almost blur the lines of, you know, kind of this exclusive way where only individuals that have some sort of opportunity through, you know, their family connections or some type of more traditional scholarship. How can we remove that so that people don't feel like they don't have the same opportunity that someone to their right or to their left does? And this is really, I think, the foundation of what ASU stands for, of driving access to all those who desire to learn, and why we feel so strongly that partnering with the private sector is the key to that. And so that's largely sort of the way that we innovated back in 2014 with our partnership with Starbucks. That's become, you know, really the model of how we want to do that more expansively, and why we co-founded the InStride partnership with TPG Rise in order to scale that innovative thinking more broadly. So just echo what Ryan said here, and I think we're definitely onto something, but you know, my viewpoint is it needs to become the rule, not the exception.
Absolutely. And we definitely agree with that. We hope that this movement that the Talent Finance Initiative will catalyze can do just that, or at least begin to do just that. And thinking of that, you know, I know Tracy, from social finance's perspective, you know, your ultimate objective is to drive measurable and lasting change in these communities. So exactly to your point, Lisa, we want to move beyond these kind of pockets and islands of great success inside of one employer's walls, but looking more broadly at how this is affecting, you know, community build and community ecosystems. So, you know, Tracy, with the work that you all have been leading around social impact bonds, career impact bonds, ISAs, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing that's consistent with the direction of this paper as it relates to these guiding principles of, you know, expanding this choice, being more inclusive, long lasting, fair and affordable?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. As you said earlier, there have been just extraordinary tools in the marketplace to think about all these things, but what is needed in this moment, and how do you infuse these guiding principles to kind of rebuild the existing tools, right? So if you think about the ISA, the income share agreement, it's actually been around for 50 years. It's actually the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman, who actually initially advocated for such a tool, which is going core to one of Ryan's frictions, right? Like, how do you mitigate the downside risk? How do you mitigate that uncertainty for students and for workers? So for us at Social Impact Bond, we are trying to take the income share agreement and turn it, in addition to being a consumer finance option, but really think about it as a tool for impact, a tool to advance economic mobility, which goes straight to your guiding principles that you just mentioned, Sarah, expanding choice, making sure it's inclusive and equitable. So we decided to come up with this term, the Career Impact Bond, not to be cute, to come up with another name for the ISA, but because we believe that there's some really strong distinctions between the Career Impact Bond and a traditional income share agreement. So as I mentioned earlier, an ISA is simply another consumer finance option, but the Career Impact Bond is very much focused on the impact that we can generate, lasting and measurable impact, as you said. So the first key distinction is that the target population is very intentionally inclusive. We are actually targeting folks who are traditionally locked out of upskilling pathways, you know, communities of color, people who are often overlooked. And because of this population, they actually need more than tuition help. They need wraparound support. Sometimes they even need help with a living stipend to help address transportation, rent, and childcare. So the Career Impact Bond also addresses those needs in addition to helping them with the cost of tuition. Third, we're very focused on, as you mentioned, one of the guiding principles, fair and affordable. We really want to make sure that the income share agreement and repayment terms are fair and first and foremost student-centric. So we typically have a very high income threshold. So unless you make more than $40,000 or $50,000, obviously depending on the job type, you don't pay. They're very friendly income share percentages and very friendly durations, the number of years that you're obligated to this. And ultimately, they're usually caps on a multiple on the tuition, typically 1.3 times, never more than 1.5 times. And importantly, the last distinction is that they're important incentive alignment among all the parties involved. We want to make sure that the training provider has skin in the game. If it's being put to work in an investment vehicle, that the investors are taking on the risk. And if it's put into say a public policy vehicle, that government's also part of the incentive arrangement. So we're putting the Career Impact Bond to work in two ways, principally right now. One, through an investment fund powered by philanthropically motivated investors, and two, working with states to anchor an evergreen fund to perpetually and sustainably train the workforce of the future by putting public dollars and philanthropy to work more sustainably.
Wow, that was about an 8-legged stool that you just described of all of the work that you're doing there. And I think that's fantastic that the ISA of the future will certainly not look like that of its past from 50 years ago, though. Happy anniversary to that model that we're still talking about today. But I want to pull on a couple of things that you said inside of there, which I think lead directly into kind of the next area that I want to get into around this public-private partnership and why we think that's so critical to the future and expansion and scaling of these innovations. But I like that you called out, the other challenges that are in the way of these workers. It's not necessarily just getting the education. There's all of these other barriers that they need to mitigate in a way that is going to allow us to truly have community impact and develop a workforce that has the right skills for the right time. It is resilient in the labor market. They know what their opportunities are. They can be supported. They have the tools on that downside risk management to be able to account for that. But looking at this through the lens of partnership, like you said, it's going to take a lot of people to do this, but we do need some employer leadership at the table to drive this innovation. We can't leave philanthropy or the public system kind of holding that entire bag, but we know that a lot of these stakeholders are risk averse. So Ryan, you had kind of mentioned a little bit about that in your opening comments around why we don't see more innovations around this. And so I want to ask you to kind of opine a little bit about how you are changing or thinking about changing these incentives for all stakeholders to work together so that we can break down some of these risk aversion barriers and share in the risk as well as the reward.
Yeah, well, look, if every major employer in America had a substantial apprenticeship program, we wouldn't have half the problems, or maybe any of these problems that we have. There would be thousands or tens of thousands of, as I like to say, faster and cheaper pathways to good first jobs in the country. But for the most part, apprenticeships remain siloed in the building and construction trades, and you can kind of count on one or two hands the number of sort of major employers that have launched real apprenticeship programs in areas of tech and healthcare and financial services and kind of the, the growing sectors of the 21st century economy. So we've looked at this problem and said, look, but who could the early adopters be? If we think about sort of a new model of 21st century apprenticeships in America, who would these early adopters be? And our answer was to kind of segment employers into sort of end employers, the ultimate consumers and employers of the talent, versus intermediaries who have the potential to build a business around talent provision to their clients. Because the fact of the matter is that in a true skill gap area, if there's truly a talent gap, and there are dozens and dozens of these micro sectors where there are tens of thousands of unfilled positions in America now, particularly with what this administration has done with the H-1B visa and H-4 program. It's just simply exacerbated the problem. But if you are operating in a skill gap, truly operating in a skill gap sector, and someone is asking you to pay tuition or take any financial risk to upskill and gain these skills, then that entity, that educational institution, either has an unimaginative business model or the wrong business model, because there is a willing payor for that skill set, which is the ultimate employer, and just a function of figuring out a new business model to do it. So we are now focused entirely, our whole firm is focused entirely on investing in scaled business services and staffing companies that operate in skill gap sectors with the view of building large scale apprenticeship models within them, because we believe, and we've proven, that you can build a business around talent provision to your clients. And in fact, scale is important. It's better to have thousands of clients than hundreds of clients. It's better to have hundreds than dozens, because you can leverage that distribution network to push a new product, which is scaled talent, purpose trained, made available on a try before you buy basis to your clients. So that's exactly what we've done in Reverture, which Jason mentioned before. That was our company, and we scaled that rapidly, so that by its third year they were placing thousands of newly trained and very diverse, in many cases first generation software developers into clients. And Reverture would remain the employer of record for up to 2 years, thereby allowing the client to try before they buy and eliminating the hiring friction, and also eliminating the education friction for the candidate, because they're hired on day one of training as a Reverture employee. So we love these models, and we think they absolutely align the incentives of all parties. Just a question of getting out there and laying those tracks. And frankly, we think ultimately there will be a lot of public-private partnerships around these models, but we don't need to wait for public sources of funding to get their act together here, because we're just going ahead and building effectively private-private partnerships, laying the rails and showing that these pathways can be built. And we're confident that later on governments will see the need to invest in these intermediaries that can bridge the gap between the current education ecosystem and employers.
Sure. Yeah. And I love what you said, that there's not an absence of payers out there. They're out there, and it's just a matter of kind of catalyzing in the right way. And, Lisa, it harkened a lot to, the objectives that you have there at InStride, with pulling in the employers and approaching this through kind of an enterprise level platform. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit how you're thinking around alignment of those incentives and kind of garnering more interest and greater ability to share in that risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to the notion that we all need to have the same outcome-driven mission, which is ensuring that we have a workforce that is always evolving, always innovating, and always has the access to the ability to educate. And that goes for, the public sector, the private sector, and the learner worker themselves. And so everyone has to be on the same page of what that outcome is. It doesn't do anybody any good if universities are educating just to give someone a degree that then can't transfer, or it doesn't do any good to have companies that are out there that aren't willing to invest in their human capital. I hear this so much that humans are our greatest form of capital. Well, then we have to find innovative ways to think about how we invest in human capital, because I think you're hearing so many different innovative ways that we're trying to think about educating the workforce differently, and really trying to kind of break down those barriers of what that could look like. So I think this is the fusion of what can we maximize, and how can we maximize that experience for, an academic institution, a corporate entity, and actually the most important character in the story is the worker and the human themselves, of how can we empower them to kind of live out this dream that they have, and to be, as maximized as possible for their personal and professional development. So that's really at the cornerstone that we're trying to accomplish here.
Right. Yeah. And definitely, you laid out in there some of the barriers that are in place that we need to help to move around. So I think a lot of that is really galvanizing why we need to make this investment in our largest asset, human capital, work with our other partners in a better way, So I want to go quickly to you, Tracy, just around kind of the measurement of this risk and how you're working with folks to think differently about this. And I know that you know, in the ecosystem of your career impact funds, you're dealing with literally every type of kind of stakeholder along that spectrum. And, you know, one of the questions that just came in was around the role of K through 12 and adult education. So I don't know if that factors into how you're thinking about this risk and where you're pulling those partners in. But if you can share just a little bit with us about how you're measuring that through your pilots and demonstrations.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I can't agree with Ryan and Lisa more. You know, the ultimate focus is on outcomes. And if workers can get the outcome that they want, then everyone wins. And as you said earlier, Sarah, right now, it's actually the way we've apportioned the risk is that it's asymmetrically and disproportionately borne by the worker, by the learner, right? And especially in an uncertain future of work, going back to Ryan's first friction, the worker is actually not equipped to bear that risk. So the student loan kind of paradigm really needs to be rethought, and that is why the Career Impact Bond, we're really excited about its promise to rewire the system and realign the incentives. So what are the risks that we're trying to realign, and who are the payors or the stakeholders, as we mentioned? There's government, there's employers, there's the training providers or the schools, there's individuals, and in the investment context, we also bring the investment community to the fore. And the way we're thinking about reapportioning that risk, it's just making sure that when businesses win, when they get the talent that they get, and the workers win as a result, it's also aligned with the investors winning as well. However, when things don't work out and employees don't gain the skills to get gainfully employed, it's actually, we want to make sure that the risks are apportioned to the right people. In this case, philanthropy and investors could bear some of that risk. The training providers also bear that risk. We want to make sure that, you know, like Lisa said, the schools and the training providers are actually confident that they can deliver graduates to make sure that they're equipped with the skills to join employers in growing industries and recession resilient industries and sectors. So thinking through the risk and the sub-risk that is associated with each of these stakeholders is very much what we're thinking about. So not just graduation rates and persistence rate, but job placement rates, in industry placement rates, sustained employment, job growth, the use of wraparound support services. And we're constantly tinkering at the edges to make sure that the repayment formulas and how to, importantly, draw the employer into the repayment formula so that it's also a tool to improve their pipeline and also improve, importantly, retention.
Right, absolutely. And I think that that's the critical thing is the upskilling, increasing retention, and just creating better conditions all around so that we do have a workforce that truly supports this global competitiveness that we need to achieve. I know we're coming up on the end of our time here today. You all have been so fantastic and I think given us so much to think about, but if I could ask the least desirable question that anyone in your position with so much to say on this topic has ever given, but if you had just a couple of words of parting advice for folks that are on the call with us today, that are going to join this movement with us, that are thinking about financing this way, that maybe early adopters are just dipping their toe into this kind of thinking, what would be your, you know, kind of nutshell guidance and advice for them? How about Lisa, I start with you and then we'll go to Ryan and Tracy.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So I would just say, you know, as we think about what we need to, how we need to convene as entities going forward, we can no longer operate innovatively on an old paradigm. And so knowing that we have to make that shift, what are going to be the best mechanisms and the best ways that we can partner to find ways to advance that forward. And I just truly believe that when you convene minds who have that same outcome-driven mission, coming from different vantage points, that's where we are going to maximize the best and innovative way forward. So I would just challenge those on the phone to think about, you know, the archaic systems that we're still operating under. We've got to lift those up and find different ways to move ourselves forward, to really operationalize and have impact on all of the topics that we're talking about here. And again, just making sure that they become the rule versus the exception. And we don't necessarily need policy to do that. We can find different ways to partner and innovate together in order to advance that forward. And I think that's the most important takeaway that I have. And, you know, Tracy and Ryan bring really innovative thought leadership to that. And from my vantage point, I've lived it and seen it in tangible examples in the corporate sector and in, you know, obviously on the public university side. So I can attest to what they're thinking. And so this is the way that we need to be moving our innovative ideas forward. So appreciate being part of this discussion and look forward to continuing the dialogue and the actions.
Same here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan?
Yeah, look, the skills gap is primarily a product of the fact that digital technology has moved the world of work away from what traditional higher education, 4-year and 2-year institutions are good at doing. And so, look, it's hard to be against education. No one is against education. Education's like motherhood and apple pie. Everyone's for it. With a finite pool of public resources, it's time to take some of those dollars that we've been using to fund traditional education and divert some of them to funding skills and funding placement into jobs as well, because funding education is not getting the job done.
Well, absolutely. Skills and competencies are the new currency that I think we need to critically think about. But Tracy, last thoughts.
Yes, 3 quick points. 1, doubling down on staying close to the labor market and building deep partnerships with employers. Number 2, stay focused on the outcomes. As Lisa said, don't worry about the delivery mechanism. You can work with a Title IV institution, you can work with a traditional workforce nonprofit, you can work for a for-profit accelerated learning platform or a boot camp. Only worry about the outcomes, don't worry about the institution type. And then finally, we are now probably, you know, since we launched the Career Impact Bond strategy in January of this year, we have now probably several hundred people enrolled in these programs. And we are seeing early signs of people actually graduating and getting jobs amidst the pandemic and really affirming this, you know, adage that talent's everywhere and opportunities not. And to see that people are actually landing jobs, you know, one particular person doubled his salary going from a bartender to be a software engineer, you know, in the middle of a pandemic is just extraordinary and incredibly inspiring.
No, absolutely. Undeniable evidence, especially in this very strange time. Well, thank you all so much for being with us here today. We look forward to working with you in the future. And thank you for the path that you've already paved for us to this point. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jason Tishko to close us out for the day. Thanks.
Hello again. This concludes Forum 3 of our 5-forum series. One thing I wanted to really emphasize, we heard a lot about the employer lanes as Peter described them, where employers are the primary issuer of a talent finance instrument or the primary recipient. And something we want to stress that is a key theme of the paper is what we need is more public-private solutions. We need the private sector to lead in new and innovative ways. So they are better deploying their finance innovations, their talent finance innovations more effectively and using new finance innovations to kind of channel those investments. But we also need the public sector to then leverage those investments and to align with them where possible. And we think that the future is going to be more public-private, greater alignment, greater braiding of resources as we pursue these new talent finance instruments. Just think of a powerful innovation like a lifelong learning account that can be portable, started by an employer and matched by an employer where it could receive special tax treatment, but also direct government investment as well. And that's something that someone could use to go and purchase and acquire new skills and competencies as they navigate the talent marketplace. So lots of opportunities here, but we wanted to really emphasize that we need the private sector to think differently about how they are providing education and career pathways, how they're managing investments in continuing education and training, and how they're also helping frontline workers manage a wide variety of downside risks in the new economy. So if you're keeping score, where we started was last week, where we released the paper and we held our kickoff event, as well as a conversation around partnerships and how to get started. This week is all about focusing on the work to be done. And we kind of put it in two buckets. Today, we dive deep into where do we need partnerships to pursue pilots and demonstrations of new talent finance innovations. And then on Thursday, we're going to be diving deeper into the enabling infrastructure that's actually going to allow us to scale those innovations. So what needs to happen around accounting practices, what needs to happen with our data infrastructure, with how we score, measure, assess, and manage risk, how we leverage new quality assurance systems. So lots of different topics coming up there, but we need to make sure that we're not only pursuing the innovations, but we're building the supporting infrastructure so that they can scale and flourish in the new economy. So that's what we're going to be doing this week. And then you'll notice we'll be 1 week off, but then we're going to reconvene for our final forum on October 13th, which will be our capstone event, where we're going to kind of take everything we've learned in the first 4 forums, make it a much more interactive session with our audience. It's going to be a full 90 minutes for that one, and we're going to kind of lay out the work that's going to come thereafter. So keep joining us on this journey as we continue to explore the topic of talent finance. And then you're not going to want to miss that capstone event, because that's going to be your opportunity to really weigh in on the potential future direction of this work. I would like to thank our partners, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, the Greater Houston Partnership, and Working Nation. I'd also like to thank our funders, JP Morgan Chase, Microsoft Philanthropies, Google.org, Schmidt Futures, and Cognizant Foundation. A special thank you to our guests for today that were on our panel, Ryan Craig, Tracy Plangian, and Lisa Young. And of course, thank you to our audience. Without you, this would not be a movement. So I will leave you with this: change the incentives and you change the marketplace. So let's get started. Thank you again. And we hope you could join us this Thursday for Forum 4.